Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to show you how you can create your own sign-in form using React and Bootstrap. Okay, so what I have on my screen is the code here on the left, and in the top right we have the window that will show you the output, and then below that we have the form that we're going to be trying to create, right? So let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set this gray background. So to do that, I'm just going to go body, and I'm going to set a background color here. Really simple. We're going to go F5 3 times, like so. Now that will just set the nice gray color. It doesn't guarantee that the body is 100% high. So I'm just going to quickly add a height here of, we'll go 100 VH. And we'll move on from that, okay? So that will make sure the height of the body, in fact it should be min height, the minimum height is always 100 VH, okay? So that's that bit done. The next step is to actually bring in Bootstrap and React Bootstrap. So I haven't done that yet. So I'm going to stop the program, clear the terminal, and I'm going to bring in the two packages that I need, which is React Bootstrap and Bootstrap version 5.1.3. So if you're following along, that's the version of Bootstrap I'm using, which is relatively new as per this video. So with the power of video editing, we can wait a moment and we should have the packages. And in fact, that was really quick. We didn't have to wait, so even better. All right, so I've installed the packages I want. I now want to also, before I start it, import the Bootstrap library into my CSS file here. So I'm going to add an @import statement, and that just ensures that Bootstrap is brought into our application. So now if I start the program, we're going npm start. It's going to start another window, but we'll just refresh the one we currently have. And if we check and we look at the styling for things, we can see that we're starting to see some reset CSS applied by Bootstrap. Cool. We can also see the ones that we just applied to the body element. Cool. All right. So the next step is to actually start building out, well, the container that surrounds this form. So to do that, I'm going to come over to my app.js, and I'm going to import my first component from React Bootstrap. And that is the container component. When I spell it right, container from React Bootstrap /container. And every single component is set up in this manner. So it's react-bootstrap /component name. Cool. So I'm just going to replace the div for the moment with the container component and save. And then we'll just take a quick look at what we have in the DOM. So there's our body, there's our root, and under our root, well, there's the div with the class container. So the container component is giving us a Bootstrap container, okay? Not going to talk too much more about that. Containers are pretty much the basic building blocks of Bootstrap. Cool. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a form, all right? So I want to create a form, obviously. This is a form. So we can pretty much copy and paste what we have up here, like so. And we're going to import the form component. And then we're going to place the form inside of our container. And then the next thing I want to do is add that Bootstrap image, all right? So let's do that. Let's go image. And for now, I'm going to actually put the source on the next line because it's going to be quite long. And it's going to be the following. So I'm just grabbing the bootstrap-solid.svg file from the Get Bootstrap website. And then I add an alt here, and I'm just going to say bootstrap 5, and then I'm going to close it. And if I do this, well, we're going to get a really, really big Bootstrap logo. All right, so clearly we need to size this. So I'm going to do that by adding a class here. So class name equals Bootstrap logo, and save. And then I'm going to go into my CSS file, and I'm going to add a selector here, setting the width to 72 pixels, and also the height to the same. So that will reduce the size of the logo, but obviously it's not in its right place right now. You can see it's kind of in the top left-hand corner almost. And the reason why it's not all the way across is, well, the screen's too wide and the default container class is preventing it from going all the way across because it has a max width set on it and the rest of it's margined in, right? So what we want to do though is we want to continue to create the rest of the form, and then as we go along we'll start positioning these elements into the center. So the next thing I'll add is this H1. So let's just quickly go and create that. So under our image, I'm going to go H1, and I'm going to set this to please sign in, like so. And when I save that, well, you can see that's also straight under the Bootstrap logo, and it's also not centered. So maybe this is the right time to start thinking about how we're going to center this thing. So on the form, what I'm going to do is center the text, because if you look at the component or the controls, everything seems to be everything seems to be centered, right? So one way we can deal with that is to go class name equals text center. And when I save this, well, you can see now it's in the center, okay? So we have it horizontally centered, but if we look at the form, it's really vertically centered too, this whole grouping. So that's because the container is centering everything. The form is centering everything, but the height of the form is only so high, and the container is only so high. So there's a few things we need to solve here. The root is only so high in our React application. So let's deal with the root not being 100% first. And the way we can get around that, and a nice little trick, is to convert the body to a grid. And by doing this, it creates a 1x1 cell that has a full width, and then the height of that cell will be whatever the height of the body is, which was said be 100% the height of the viewport. So if we do that and we check the root, now we can see that's 100% high. The container's not, right? So now we need to deal with the container not being 100% high. Well, we can deal with that by converting that to a grid, right? And how we can do that is to add another class on the container. So class name, and I'm going to set 2D grid, right? But that's not going to solve the height issue. That's going to solve the fact that everything within it will be 100% high. We need to set the height of the container itself. So we're going to go H for height, and then 100. And that says be 100% the height of your parent. And when we do that, now we get a container that's 100% high. Cool. The form is also 100% high as a result of applying this deep grid. If I get rid of that, then you'll see that the form is only as high as the content. So we don't want that to be the case. We want to set that to 100% high. And we also want to vertically position our form. So obviously when you use CSS Grid, you can do this quite easily, right? You just position elements inside of your grid by using place items. The problem with that is it doesn't work with Bootstrap. So we need to apply a separate CSS rule or a CSS property to our container. Now I'm going to do that by applying an ID here called main container. And then I'm going to select this in my CSS. So just above the Bootstrap logo, we'll go main container. And I'm going to set, because it's already a grid, place items, center, center. So it says get all the children that are of this grid, place them horizontally in the center and vertically in the center. And now if I save, now you can see that the form is directly in the middle, okay? It's not the right width, right? So we want the width to be a certain number of pixels wide. So this happens to be 330 maximum wide at all times. So we now need to style this to make sure that it's 100% wide of its whatever its max limit is, and the max limit has to be 330 pixels. Okay, so that's what we're going to do right now. So that we'll deal with the 100% width issue first. So on our form where we have the text center, we're going to set the width to 100% by using W-100, and that will increase the width of the form all the way across. But as you can see, that's not 330 pixels, right? That's more than that. It's 516. So we also need, because we don't have a Bootstrap class for this, an ID selector for this. I'm going to call it sign in form. And once again, I'm going to come into my CSS, wrong one. I'm going to come into this CSS, and I'm going to, under here, go sign in form, and I'm going to set the max width to 330 pixels, like so. And when I do that, we can check the form element again, and you can see that it's trying to grow as much as it can out to 330 pixels wide, which is what we want. Cool. So now we've got it aligned. Obviously, we want to deal with the spacing issues between the icon here and the heading. And we also want to change the style of the heading to look like this over here. Okay, so I'm going to close this up, and we'll deal with the spacing between these two elements first. So coming back to app.js, I'm going to apply to this image another class. I'm going to call it MB-4. MB is margin bottom, if you don't know Bootstrap, and 4 is kind of like how much margin bottom do I want to give. I think this equates to 24 pixels or something to that nature. So if I now save this, you can see there's a lot more spacing between the icon and the heading. Okay. Now, if I was to check this, I'm pretty sure that by setting it 4, this would be 24 pixels of space, and it is. There it is right there. Okay. So that's that spacing covered. Now let's deal with the heading. So the heading is just a little bit too big for me. So I'm going to come in and apply a class name here, and I'm going to use another Bootstrap class, which is the FS3. And what this says is essentially font size, sizing of 3. So if I save this, you can see it's shrunk down a little bit to what it would be. But when I make it full screen, you can see it's exactly the same as this, right? The other thing I want to do is get rid of the bolding. So we can get rid of that pretty easily by just adding another class, which is font weight normal, right? So if you think about it, that's a normal font weight, and this is also normal font weight. So these two are now pretty much the same. Cool. Now, let's get into the actual form itself. We've only done the top part of the form. We haven't done any of the inputs. So basically how React Bootstrap does it is they like to have form groups and then form controls, form labels, and things of that nature. So we need to get access to our form group, and that's done by accessing on the form a child component called a group, just like that. And if I close that, nothing happens. But inside of here, we're going to put a control, right? So we have form group, and inside the form group, we have a form control. The type of form control I want is an email control. The size of that control by default is small, but I want it to be large. So there's only small or large. And then the placeholder will be, well, it'll be email address, because that's what's in the text down here. And then I'm going to use autocomplete. So autocomplete is a special attribute that allows you to set up your autocomplete within your browser to auto-populate the value, which we want it to grab the username from the record, and we'll end it there for now. So that now gives us an input that looks pretty much the same as this. Not quite, but almost the same. I think the spacing between the please sign in and the input needs to be addressed. So we can do that by looking at the heading and going, cool, let's add some spacing here. Maybe we'll give it a little bit less than the spacing between the logo and the heading. We'll put between the heading and the input. And that looks about right, all right, compared to what's down here, okay? So that's username. Let's just copy and paste for the password. So we'll just change a few things up and go password when I spell it right. And in here we'll go password. And then for the autocomplete, well, if you don't know autocomplete, essentially we want the current password. Cool. And if I save this, well, it looks the same as down here. The only issue that may not be obvious is when I click on these two controls, you can see that blue outline is hovering over the input. So this blue bottom line is hovering over the top of the password input. And then when I click password input, you can see that's hovering over the top of the email. But with our example, that isn't the case. So you can see the outline is underneath the password. And well, password works because it's the second control in our form, right? So we really need to bring this up when we focus on it, so it's above the password. So the way to do that is to basically address the fact that they're sitting in a static position and make them relative. So I'm going to add a class name here of position dash relative. And that's how you can set the position property on your input to be relative. I'm going to do the same for the one below, like so. And that alone won't fix the problem, right? The next thing we want to do is we want to target this input and we want to apply a Z index that's higher, okay? But we only want to do that when we're focusing on the input. So how do we target this form control? Well, if we look at the HTML that it renders, all right, so we'll scroll down and actually target one of these inputs. Here's the input. And if we look carefully, we can see that there's a class called form control applied to it and a control called form control large. That's because we chose the size of large. If we choose the size of small, for example, then that class will become form control small, okay? So we're going to target this form control class, and then we're going to target the focus pseudo class on it. So let me set that back. So inside of here, just underneath there, form control is the thing we're targeting, and we're going to target the focus pseudo element or pseudo class, sorry, and we're going to set a Z index on this to something higher than 1. Let's go 5 and save. And now that I've done this, we can see that the outline is in fact going over the top of the one below and vice versa. Cool. So that addresses that small little issue that you may not have noticed, but that's how you can solve that problem, right? Because all we're doing is when we click on this input, we're raising the Z index just enough so that the outline comes over the top of the one that isn't focused. All right, nice. So what have we got left? We've got the checkbox, we've got the button, and we've got the copyright. So let's go to the checkbox, as that's part of another form group. So we can almost pretty much grab what's here, paste it down to the next line. But instead of having form control, we're going to have one called form check. Right, and this really just means checkbox or radio button in the React Bootstrap world. And what we're going to do is set a label on it. So the label is the text that sits next to the checkbox. And I'm going to say, remember me, just like so. And when I do this, well, we're going to see something a little bit weird compared to what we have down here. And that's the text over here is not directly next to the checkbox. And that's got to do with the fact that I'm using text center up here. So if I was to remove this, for example, and save, now you can see the text stays right next to the checkbox, but then you lose the text alignment of the rest of the stuff. So I'm going to put that back, and we'll just address this problem by applying some classes to the form group that the checkbox sits inside of. So we'll go class name, and I'm going to set it to a flex container by using the deflex class. I'm then going to go justify content center, which will center everything inside that flex container, and that will do for now. Cool. So now that puts everything in the middle. Now there's not much spacing between the input above and the checkbox group. So we can address that by just coming up to this group and saying, you know what, you can have a class of margin bottom 3. Save. And now we've got some spacing there. Fantastic. Now, before I move on to the button, one thing I want to quickly mention is that none of these inputs have any IDs. All right, so if we look at this input up here, there's no ID here, and there's no ID for the one below it, which is in this one, and there's no ID for the checkbox either, right? So that label isn't really going to work, because if I click on it, see how it doesn't actually change the checkbox value at all? And that's because we need to give IDs to things. So how you do that in the React Bootstrap world is to apply a control ID attribute to each group. So control ID, and this one, because it's the email, will be signed in email address. All right, and if I save that and we come to where our input is, now you'll see that our input has an ID of sign in email address. All right, if I make it a bit wider, there it is right there. All right, cool. And we'll do the same for the other two. So control ID for this one, we'll apply it just before the class. This one will be sign in password, which in turn will give us an ID of sign in password down here. Sign in password. And we need one for the checkbox to get that thing working. So let's just add this and we'll call it remember -me and save. And when I do that, now we should be able to click on the text and you can see that the checkbox actually fires, which is great. So that's just that extra little nuance that you may not know about when you first use React and Bootstrap together, especially with the React Bootstrap library. And now let's attack the button, okay? So obviously the button's another component, so we can import that component by pretty much just using the same conventions that we have up here, but just grabbing the button component. So we do the following, save, and now we can come down underneath our form group and we'll just create a button. I'm going to give it a special attribute called the variant, and that is just the type of button that you have in Bootstrap. By setting it to primary, you're saying it's the primary style, so it's essentially this style here, okay? I'm going to give it a size as well of large, because I want the larger button and the larger text and everything else to do with the button. And then I'm going to put inside of it sign in. Now, when I save this right now, the button isn't actually going to be the large button. And that's kind of the result of me using text align and a few other bits and pieces. So to get around this, I'm going to add a div here, and I'm going to convert this div to have a class name of the grid, like so. And I silly didn't close that properly. So if I save this, now it goes full width. So it detects that it's inside of a grid. It goes, oh, okay, well, by default, items inside of a grid in itself should go 100% the width of the cell. So it makes it the button 100% wide, which is great. Now, obviously, there's not enough spacing between the checkbox and the button. So once again, we can add a margin. So just after the justify center content center here, we'll add an MB-4 and save, and there we got our spacing. Fantastic. Cool, so we're nearly home. If we think about it, we just need to get the copyright in. Well, that's easy, all right? It's just a bit of text. So just come down here, go P, we'll go the @copy, or the copyright symbol, 2021 to 2022, save, and we don't have the right spacing, so we can come up to, we could come up to the div here, but we could also apply a class here just to show something different. So class name, instead of margin bottom, we're going to go margin top, and we'll add 5, like so, and save, and that will give us the space that we want between it. So we're almost done. Obviously the text color is different, and basically what that text color is a representation of is the muted text class that's in Bootstrap. And once again, if I save that, now we finally have exactly the same thing as we do below. Now, I think I saw an error. Just want to quickly clarify what that is. Is it still there? It is. So that means that I'm using class somewhere instead of using class name. So we'll just look for the class equals. There it is right there. Okay. So this needs to be class name. You may have spotted that as I was typing it. But now that I've done that, there should be no errors once I refresh. And there we go. Beautiful. So that is how you can create a sign-in form using Bootstrap and React. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell. And I'll see you all next time.